and welcome back to another edition of Stirring It Up with Tia Monique, Kitchen Table Talk. And on this edition of Political News, we went over to MSNBC, buzzed around, snatched up this little piece from Andrew Weissman, and decided to share. Take a listen and we'll talk about it on the other side.
Brooklyn prosecutor hat of, okay, what can we do? And there are actually two things that the next attorney general can do with respect to the president, because the president has a very, very broad power to pardon, but he cannot pardon in exchange for something. In other words, there cannot be a bribe or a quid pro quo. So we talked last night about the pardon for Esformis, this major healthcare fraud defendant. And there, you sort of really question, how did that happen? And the next attorney general can look into whether Trump or anyone else did this as a quid pro quo. Was there something, some money, for instance, would be the classic case. Second, the president may not be able to pardon himself. I'm sure he's going to try to do it. But, you know, the president faces criminal exposure for obstruction of the Mueller investigation. And what we're seeing in the last few days is basically a confession. You know, this is such strong evidence of obstruction. He's carrying out the dangled pardons that you referred to. He is now carrying out in real time. And one of the things that you can do as a federal prosecutor is you can put Paul Manafort and Roger Stone into the grand jury and ask them questions. And obviously you would wait until January 20th so that the president can't interfere with this. And you can ask them questions about, what were your communications with the White House? Why did you lie for the president? A whole series of questions. Now, if Paul Manafort or Roger Stone were to assert the Fifth Amendment at that point, and they may have a colorable argument for it, you can just immunize them and force them to testify. You'll be no worse off than you are now. But the idea here is that the president cannot necessarily pardon himself out of the obstruction criminal liability that he faces federally. So that, to me, is something where he may get hoisted on his own petard if you have an aggressive new attorney general in place in the Biden administration.
So even though the pardon power is plenary, if the president is giving out pardons in exchange essentially for bribe of obstructing justice or some other, if he's doing it as part of the commission of a crime, then retroactively he may have trouble with some of these pardons.
Yeah, and maybe the easiest way to think about it, that second piece, is the president may not be able to pardon himself. There's the president faces clear legal liability, in my view, for obstructing our investigation, and he may try to pardon himself. That issue of whether a president can pardon himself is undecided by the Supreme Court, and everything that he is doing now can be just additional evidence of that obstruction. And that will tee up for the Supreme Court the issue of whether the president can pardon himself or not. But I'd say President Trump has certainly created the worst possible record going before the Supreme Court to say, here's a really good reason why presidents should be able to pardon themselves, because we're seeing in real time just how outrageous it is in the way that the president is using this. You made the argument last night, which is, what if he told someone to kill somebody and then said, I'll pardon you and I'll pardon myself for that murder? That clearly cannot be what the Constitution allowed. So essentially, Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, and a number of other people can be put in the grand jury and asked about the president to beef up a future case against the president. With Alex van der Zwaan and George Papadopoulos, I think one thing that's important to note is, while the president has sort of diminished their crimes by saying they're only process crimes, under the law, there is no such thing as a, quote, process crime. And lying to investigators, obstructing an investigation, that goes to the very heart of the ability to find out what happened. Judge Amy Berman Jackson, when she sentenced Paul Manafort, noted Don't tell me that the Mueller investigation didn't get to the bottom of collusion when you have obstructed that investigation by lying. So these kinds of crimes of lying and obstructing, which Roger Stone did, Michael Flynn did, George Papadopoulos did, Alex van der Zwaan did, and others, are all ways that you thwart an investigation. And it really means, if you look a step back, that the president is really rewarding those people and saying, you know what, don't worry about appointing a special counsel, because the president always has a, no pun intended, trump card of pardoning people so that they don't have to cooperate with any investigation into the presidency.
Right. This sets a precedent in terms of future presidents, future presidential scandals, future special counsels and special prosecutors. Absolutely. It also, as you noted and as I've noted, goes right at the heart of the original crime that led to the both counterintelligence and criminal investigation as to a foreign adversarial power interfering in our election. Everybody who got caught up in that investigation, who lied to obstruct it, and who tried to conceal the nature of their communications with people connected to the Russian government, is finding themselves to be excused in that, which says a lot about that crime and its likelihood of being repeated. Do we have any further understanding as to how he came to this list and why now?
What we're trying to understand at this hour is how many of these pardons came through the typical Justice Department process for recommending them. The Justice Department for many years has had this system to ensure that pardons are doled out for reasons of grace and mercy. They've had the system to ensure that there's a uniform process to it. We know that Trump has ignored that process in his past pardons, that he has gone off and done things on his own. He's allowed Kim Kardashian into the Oval Office to lobby him for pardons. And at first glance, when looking at these pardons tonight, it's clear that many of them don't even meet the basic criteria to receive a typical Justice Department recommendation for a pardon. So that means that they operated essentially outside the system, that anyone could have gone to the White House and lobbied the president, Jared Kushner, or anyone else in the West Wing for these directly. And it's that type of lobbying that people say is concerning, because it allows the process to not be about grace and mercy. It allows it to be about connections and lobbying.
And Mike, do we know anything about whether this big raft of pardons, if this is at all tied to the timing of Attorney General Barr's departure? His last day at the Department of Justice is tomorrow. He certainly had put some distance between himself and some of the more outlandish requests and demands from the president in recent days. The pardon power being used by the president in this way, as you say, perhaps not through any of the systematized processes of the Department of Justice. Are these the pardons that Barr is okay with? And so these are the ones that happen while he's still there? Do we know if there's any connection with the end of his tenure?
My guess is that there probably isn't, because it doesn't appear like the Justice Department was involved in many of these. This has been a very White House-driven process. This has been the type of thing that the president, because he has gotten rid of the typical way that pardons are looked at, it has allowed people to come in and to treat this as if they were lobbying for a company or lobbying for a bill. And the president obviously really entertains that. He likes it when people come up to him, whether it's at a campaign event or at one of his golf clubs, to ask him about this type of thing, to ask him about a pardon. It's something that the president can create instantaneous loyalty when he does. And because of that, if you look at the past numbers that he has granted, the pardons he has granted, of the 45 that he had granted up until today, 40 of the 45, 88%, were either tied to one of his allies, someone who had special access to him, or was tied to something that politically benefited him personally.
That piece of reporting, and in fact, perhaps even that soundbite of you saying that right here this night on the night of these pardons, will be I promise you, used in a congressional hearing at some point in the future when some future Congress seriously considers whether or not within the Constitution they can reform the pardon process so that it cannot be used as a spoils system and essentially a bribery system by a sitting president, because that is just stunning. Michael Schmidt from the New York Times, a Washington correspondent for the Times, who's been following this breaking news all evening. Mr. Schmidt, thank you very much for your time this evening. I really appreciate it.
All right, my friends, and that does it for another riveting episode of Stirring It Up with Tara Monique, Kitchen Table Talk. So what do you think? Has Trump gone pardon crazy? Does he have pardon fever? Ooh, pardon me. So please express yourself in the comments section. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And sharing is caring. Until next time, be your best. Bye.